I'm very glad to be here at this wonderful conference, and thank you for a great opening keynote. It will be a bit difficult to give something as inspiring and funny following that presentation, but I will do my best. So in this presentation, I will talk about organizational strategies in digital humanities centers, and that's basically based drawing on findings of my 5-year ethnographic study conducted as part of 4 research projects at the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences and at the Penn State University. Those projects were funded by the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research and the Mellon Foundation. This will be a bit difficult in between two. Oops, no. Okay, this is the one. My fieldwork was carried out at 23 educational research and funding institutions in the United States and Europe. It involved 258 participants, including researchers, faculty, students, university administrators, librarians, software developers, policymakers, and funders. Through case studies, surveys, in-depth interviews, and observations, the study sought to highlight issues relevant to understanding digital scholarship in the humanities at 3 levels: the individual scholar, academic field, and academic organizations. And I apologize again, this is a bit difficult really to navigate between 2 computers. I thought that we would be using one, but okay. No, it is. I'm trying to, yeah. This is the one, yes. So during my fieldwork, I also visited and analyzed the 11 digital humanities centers. The sites that I visited included units recognized as pioneers of the DH Center movement, as well as those that were still in the making when I visited. All centers are affiliated with research-intensive universities, have a dedicated physical space, and employ between 5 and 15 staff members. Most of these staff members are traditionally trained humanists with advanced computational skills, as I will talk a bit later in this presentation. So in this presentation, I will first focus about strategies for developing a DH Center, including formulating its mission, as well as deciding who and how develops a center. I will then switch to talking about people, 2 main categories, including users and employees of DH centers. Finally, I will talk about the activities of DH centers, and in the interest of time, I will focus on instructional activities. I will end my presentation with a set of proposed conclusions and recommendations, and open, of course, for any questions and suggestions that you might have. So now, when we talk about strategies, the first thing that I mentioned is mission. And during my fieldwork, I would usually start a visit to a DH center asking with which goal in mind was this particular center established. A common narrative across the centers I visited associated their foundational goals and mission with the broad task of promoting humanities scholarship in the digital age. Sometimes those goals were as ambitious as wanting to revolutionize the ways humanities scholars are doing their work, and sometimes articulated as more modest efforts to inspire humanists to think about digital technologies. A closer ethnographic look at digital humanities centers revealed, however, that transformation and innovation are, as we might assume, highly context-dependent concepts with diverse meanings. The empirical data collected in this study thus indicated the various directions in which different development tracks of DH centers unfold in both synchronic and diachronic perspectives. A significant difference in the diachronic perspective is the bottom-up character of the early initiatives constructing against the top-down nature of newer digital humanities center. In the early days, a small group of scholars, not necessarily humanists, initiated digital humanities centers. As one of my respondents said, This place was the creation of two of us, humanities faculty. After 5 years, our university finally invested, and that made the center possible. But it was a bottom-up thing. It wasn't the university saying, we need to have one of those things, give us a digital humanities center, as we might quite often hear. Now, in later top-down cases, university administrators often wanted to establish a hub of scholarly innovation without a clear sense of what that innovation entailed, what the center's function would be, the range of services it should provide, and who would comprise the primary user base. So in this case, we hear, for example, the impetus for establishing the center was to see what would happen if we moved central IT and the library closer together. So let's just put them together and see what happens. And this second part of the quote I particularly like. So my respondent says, I was the librarian for literature and history, and my boss said one day, well, why don't we just add the words digital humanities to the end of your job title and see what happens? So can you imagine what happened afterwards? Yes, what kind of a change?
Well, I'm the librarian, so I'm looking forward to
Well, what she said happened to her was that suddenly, like in a week, she got so many meeting requests, like she did not in the previous 2 months. So that was really the biggest change that she noticed. Simply adding that descriptor, digital humanities, was enough for that. Now, when thinking about how to develop a digital humanities center, space, I found, was often the first consideration. At one center I analyzed, for example, which was housed in the university library, new glass walls represented visually transparent boundary between the print and the electronic materials. Flexible workspaces with standing stations equipped with high-end technologies were designed to adjust to user needs. But while design, ergonomic, and technical features were meticulously considered, the goals for the center and thoughts about the user community were given less attention. So this is what one of the respondents says. When we just threw the doors open without the clear sense, basically just to go back to this, one of the assumptions is just build a nice space full of new devices and so on, and they will come, like we're developing tools. We often see that that's actually not the case. In this case, a manager of a DH center says, when we just threw the doors open without a clear sense of who we are targeting services to, the undergraduates saw the monitors were the biggest around and moved in, of course. So graduate students and faculty would poke their heads in the door and see Facebooking undergraduates, and they didn't really use the space like we thought they would. So another campus of the same university simultaneously launched its own digital humanities center using a very different organizational strategy. The idea to establish the center in that case came from the humanities scholars rather than from the university administration. This dedicated group of scholars began the planning phase with a university-wide dialogue. They included their colleagues from the humanities division, information technologies, computer scientists, librarians, digital librarians, and other potential stakeholders. Those early conversations helped identify which organizational strategies and design possibilities were consistent with their goals for the center and resulted in well-defined goals and clear mission statement for the new unit. The director of that center says, we decided we really wanted to make a research environment and not a room full of hardware. So the center is not a place you can go and find lots of gadgets and play with wires. Now, important factor in planning digital humanities centers include formulating goals and identifying the intended user community. In a number of centers I visited, the main goal was to support humanities scholars in their current research and to gradually introduce them to digital tools and methods that might benefit their work. They usually call that strategy, do not scare them off right away. Just go slowly about that. Those centers target the widest possible spectrum of humanists as their potential user base rather than rely on scholars who were already well-versed or inclined to use digital tools and methods. These centers bridge the critical gap between technologically advanced and less advanced scholars and promote an inclusive approach to digital humanities. So that was already about the center. So an important question in developing a digital humanities center is seriously making that decision. Do you want to support humanities scholars or digital humanities scholars, as I already mentioned? So at one of the centers, they said, we made a decision in developing the center to concentrate on those tools that would be of use to the broadest possible spectrum of humanists. We wanted to build a site that would not increase the ghettoization of digital humanities, but bring it as much as possible into the mainstream. Some centers adopt a more prescribed approach when establishing goals and characterizing potential user communities. For instance, at one of the centers I studied specifically targets graduate students as their primary user base. And those decisions are often based on organizational and financial strategies within the university itself. So at one university, for example, DH work was spread out across 5 organizations and institutions. And as you can imagine, it caused a lot of confusion among users. Now, beyond formulating key goals and identifying an intended user base, digital humanities centers may also reach potential users. This outreach effort is particularly relevant considering resistance toward digital scholarship that traditionally trained humanists sometimes hold. A lot of scholars rely on digital tools, but when they hear the word digital humanities, they don't think it's interesting to them. That's what my respondents often used to say. My respondents thus stress that outreach often needs to be personal in order to be successful. So they talk individually to potential users, explaining how digital tools and methods could be beneficial for their specific research and teaching activities. This approach, however, brings the question of time, that of the employees in digital humanities centers who do not always have the time to talk to potential users individually and learn about their specific needs, as well as the time of potential users who cannot easily fit in one or more activities in their busy schedules. As one of the respondents put it, these are very busy people and they're ultimately making choices between do they go and pay attention to our demonstration about digital tools, or do they spend that hour and focus on their own research questions? And so we are competing with natural priorities in a scholar's life. I just want to add here that an important part of this is, of course, that scholars are not rewarded for developing competencies in digital humanities, learning new digital methods, tools, and so on. They're rewarded for publishing. And that's why we get those results, that they simply do not have the time to spend on this. Finally, humanists often hold that mainly their peers understand epistemological and methodological complexity of particular research problems, which makes them the most credible sources for suggesting adequate digital tools and methods. Exchange of experiences among peers is thus one of the most successful outreach strategies. And again, as my respondent said, if you can reach the right people, that's actually the best way, the best outreach strategy. And this quote brings us to the profile of employees in digital humanities centers. Who is the staff? How do we select theirs? So due to institutional and financial constraints, digital humanities centers usually cannot afford a permanent staff of computer scientists and developers. Instead, technical expertise comes from occasional partnership with university IT departments, or more frequently from employing traditionally trained humanists who also have good computational skills, so-called hybrids, as you know. These people are seen as a necessary link between the two cultures, as they can understand the needs and values of both cultures and translate epistemological and methodological concepts as approaches, as this respondent says. Smart organizations will have more people like me who can speak both programmese and scholarese. If you have a DH center, you need somebody who can talk and motivate people in the programming side and actually explain what the humanities talk about. Now, such practitioners who pursue alternative academic careers risk professional setbacks in their skills and positions are still evaluated within the traditional academic paradigms, as this respondent points out. From an administrative point of view, how are we thinking about people's time and labor? It's going to be maybe the issue that I think DH centers should engage with, because our inherited system of classifying employees are not well suited to DH practices. I will now switch to their learning activities and say that in bridging the gap between technology and humanities scholars, the activities of DH centers commonly involve instruction in digital tools and methods, tools and project development, fostering collaboration, and so on. But as I said in this presentation, I will focus on instructional activities. And when I ask my interviewees, where do scholars in their field of study learn to use digital research and methods and tools, the undivided response is, you already had a sneak peek, or you can just imagine based on your own experience. What would your colleagues say? Where is it that they usually learn about digital tools and methods? Elsewhere, okay? The answer that I heard most often is on their own. So they combine different strategies, but predominantly rely on informal channels, such as word of mouth. The only organized educational initiatives at their disposal are training sessions and university libraries and DH centers. Humanists in my study had a mixed reaction to such initiatives. While some said that the sessions were eye-opening, others did not find them so helpful. Commonly identified problems are that instruction mostly focuses on digital resources and tools. And when it comes to research questions, it goes out of the instructor's scope and falls into the field-specific area. So as this important says, if such an individual think what a particular person needs and their learning process, and those classes are so generic, it just misses the mark a lot. So learning about new tools and methods would be from colleagues mostly. And since I'm also running out of time, I will go to my conclusions and recommendations. Shall I just?
That's the matter. If you want to finish, you will not get questions.
Okay.
What the audience thinks about that? Okay.
Okay, or I can summarize basically in one sentence what I wanted to say, basically that this transition towards digital scholarship is a very complex process that really needs to be handled in that systematic and inclusive manner. The different stakeholders, as our keynote speaker was talking, really need to be involved in the process. And my argument is also that digital humanities centers and instruction should be put closely together to the main disciplinary flows and work. Those are some of the main things that I wanted to convey. And thank you so much. I wanted to also give the information that all of this and much more is summarized in my book, Amongst Digital Humanists, and I welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.